It's been wet since building my trail, so riding that will have to wait. In the meantime, the devil has control of my idle hands. Now I have a healthy collection of forks, but they're all far too strong and boring. So I'm going to do something sketchy and make my own rigid fork. I mean, what could go wrong? Now I'm not going to be welding any tubes together. I'm going to be using a suspension fork and Frankenstein monstering it into a short, rigid, scary thing. My donor fork is one of those cheap Asian models you see on eBay and AliExpress. They're practically useless as a suspension fork, but rigid? Let's find out. Now I chose these ones in particular because they have 34mm stanchions, which I hope will make it stiff and strong. If not, I'll just fill it with spinach. Now I like the clicky bits, but I need to strip it naked, so everything's gotta go. Now I've never taken a fork fully apart, so I'm guessing I just undo all these bolts and see what happens. Plastic? Ugh. Basic damper is basic. After all that, this is the main part I'm interested in. The plan is to use this as is and just add some dropouts. But looking at it, I think the legs might be a bit on the short side. This means this project just got a little more of a handful, as I need to replace these legs with longer ones. But where can I find nice strong tubes in the right diameter? Well, seat posts are strong, right? If one seat post can take an adult human with human accessories sat down off-road, then 2 posts should be strong enough for a trials fork, right? Maybe a decent theory, but the posts I have are neither the right diameter or long enough. But I did consider this situation, and when buying this fork, I bought a few other things too. Check this beauty out. This is a Light Pro 33.9mm seat post and is exactly what I was hoping to find. All of the length I'll ever need and exactly the right diameter. Not a bad price either. But wait, there's more. They also do a carbon version, which I couldn't resist trying. Looks like I might have to make more than one fork. 90 kg max load is well within its fail range I'd expect. Plus, that's at its full length. Once I shorten it, it might be a googolplex times stronger. Then times that by 2, cross some fingers, and it might cope with a bit of trials abuse. Interestingly, the aluminium version's max weight is lower. Better cross some toes too with this one. I can't tell too much difference in weight by hand. But the carbon one is 29 grams lighter. Either way, I have enough for 2 forks and double the danger. But the first hurdle, how do I get the original legs out? These are press fitted using huge forces and maybe even some bondage compound. I don't have huge forces, but I do have opposable thumbs which allow me to hold and hit things. So let's hold some stuff and hit it with them. The first thing I'm going to hit it with is some fire. So rather than have the paint burn, I'm just going to remove it with some strip tease. Works for clothes, so must work for paint too. Now, I'm not convinced fire will work for removing the legs, but I like fire, so that's enough reason to try it. The theory is that metals expand when heated, and maybe the crown can expand enough to release its grip. But then again, it expands in every direction, including possibly tightening its grip. But again, fire. After plenty of teasing, the crown finally got undressed. So, if my calculations are good, this amount of fire on this exact spot should make this slide out like butter. Okay, this isn't working. It must need more fire. Like butter. Okay, Calculus isn't my strong point. This just isn't working. The obvious solution is to do the opposite of something that doesn't work. By that logic, I have to use ice, and it's guaranteed to be the opposite of failure. Well, it just so happens I have the Arctic just next to my vise. As all as men know, things shrink in the cold, so the fork legs should do the same. Oh, damn it. Must be a female fork. Okay, stereotypes aside, cooling down both the legs and the crown was never going to work. They both just shrink and nothing would change. What I need to do is have them at different temperatures, so maybe if I heat the crown accurately enough, it might let go. Or it might not. So we've hit it with fire, ice, and then ice and fire with no luck. Let's hit it with something heavy and use its own top cap against it as a pusher thing. Now some workshops have hammers, I have an axe. And bad aim. And you can also add bad ideas to that list. Turns out hitting threaded components just makes them get stuck. Fortunately, I did get it out after some mild panic. Next up, let's try hitting it with a hole. The idea being is to put this stud bolt through and then give it a pounding. At this point, I'm pretty much throwing everything I can think of at it. I'll give the manufacturer some credit. They seem to have put it together solidly enough. All that and it's not moved an inch. I'd even take a millimetre at this point. I'm not giving up though. One way or another, these legs are coming out. Now as you can tell by all my tops changing, this video took many days, and in the meantime, the second donor fork arrived. Well, only half a fork this time. It's a Fox 34 CSU, which does have legs long enough to use just as is. Off camera, I cut down the cheap fork lowers with the idea that they'll just slide on the legs and have the dropouts ready to go. Amazingly, the fork length works out exactly the same as most Charles forks. There is an issue though. These lowers are designed to have bushings inside to allow the stanchions to slide easily, which means they're just too loose of a fit on the legs. Not ideal for a strong bond edge. I need something that's going to be a much more snug fit, and I might have just the thing. This is a Fox 32 that I've had for years and I doubt I'll ever use again. It has the same dropout spacing and seemingly identical crown spacing, so in theory, as long as the 34mm uppers fit in these lowers, everything should line up. Annoyingly, I don't know the wall thickness to check if this will fit, so I'm going to have to do this the only way I know how, with some destruction. I was hoping just a bit of disassembly would be enough, but those pesky bushings are in the way. Only one thing for it. Where's my saw? So yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said destruction. I'll be gutted if they don't fit. Moment of truth. Yes, an absolute perfect fit. Let's get the other done. Being magnesium, these are super light. Plus, as a bonus in an emergency, they can light the way in the dark when burned. Pyrotechnics aside, I test fit the dropouts to make sure everything lines up, which it does. The Fox 32's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Part of me thinks this went too easily though. Why settle with a working project when I can potentially ruin it all by fitting these carbon legs like I said I would? Now of course, this is all assuming I can actually get the stanchions removed, and we all know how well that's going. But the Fox 34 wasn't the only thing that came in the post today. Meet my newest weapon, dry ice. I could just imagine the comment section having a go at me expecting my freezer to work, so I decided to go even colder. This stuff is minus 78 degrees and will hopefully do a much better job. So that didn't do the job. On to plan G. I cut the leg shorter, then cut out a section of the lower, and then I'll see if I can press it out. Not full success, but it has moved a millimetre, so there's hope yet. Now I know it can move, I decide to try and twist it out. I'm so glad I bolted this vise down well. Even though it was possible to twist the leg, it wasn't moving out of the crown. The last resort is using my Dremel to carefully cut slots and use the vise to crimp the legs and have it slide out that way. It's certainly been a challenge, but I finally have one leg removed. Only 3 more to do, but at least I've had good practice. I also get to find out how well the new legs will fit. Turns out it'll be a perfect press fit. Ideal. I'm curious to see whether the dry ice will shrink it enough just to slide in by hand. I didn't know tubes could feel pain though. I kinda feel bad. But it turns out the dry ice helps, but it still needs some persuasion. I try hammering it in with my wooden headset press, which ends up just making a ton of kindling. Looks like I need a new headset tool now. It was somewhat successful though, and it is almost all the way in. This is why I didn't use any stud lock or epoxy. I was worried I might not get it fully seated before it set. So, a long time after most people would have realised that hitting it with soft bit of wood wasn't the best method, I decided to be a bit more precise. I bought a long threaded bar, some washers and nuts, and I'll try and press it in instead. Finally, an idea that actually worked perfectly. The Dremel and crush technique worked well before, so I repeat the process to amputate the other leg. Much easier now I've had some practice. And my makeshift clamp once again did a great job pressing in the second leg. And there we have it, 2 legs tightly fitted. That was quite the challenge, but it's not over yet. I'm going to put my new skills to the test on the other fork and try and fit the carbon legs next. But before I tackle that, I realised the steerer wasn't long enough. I forgot to press record, sorry, but as you can see from the top of the steerer and the bottom of the legs, it put up quite a fight when I hammered it out. I have a replacement steerer, but before I attempt to fit that, I'll get to work removing the legs. I did ever so slightly nick the inside of the crown, but overall I'm pretty pleased with my accuracy. I then strip the crown and it's ready for a new steerer. My makeshift clamp worked well for the legs, so I'm hoping it will work well for the steerer too. I froze the new steerer with the dry ice and I'm hoping it will be a relatively easy fit. Now it worked up until a point, but then even with some extra leverage and heat, it just wouldn't go any further. Cue my disappointment. I don't want to damage the crown or steerer, but desperate times call for desperate hitting things really hard measures. It didn't work though, and it stuck fast. Last resort, time to ask for some help. Less than an hour up the road is the Sterling Bike Doctor, who has a workshop I dream of owning, and he has tools specifically for this job. Sadly, I was pretty much his last customer, as he's now shut his shop as he wants to change career. He sure got me out of this pickle though. Thanks Andy. Thandy. Now the steer is fitted, let's get these carbon legs prepped. The end I want to use is pure carbon, but the other end has an aluminium insert. An insert seems like a good idea to avoid the carbon being crushed, so I'll make my own. The leg has the perfect internal diameter for this 29mm tube. I cut it long enough so it extends below the crown, which I hope will avoid the carbon developing a stress riser. I then give it a hug with some sandpaper and a clean with some acetone, then mix together some epoxy and press it inside the carbon leg. Stoked with the result. I repeat the process and that's both inserts inserted. The only issue now is the legs are a pretty loose fit. I never even considered these might be slightly different size to the alloy ones. They're both meant to be the same. This could be a disaster. But I'm not one to give up this easily though. I'm going to resort to one of the OG hacks, using a drink can to shim it out. Now, it's not as ideal as a real nice press fit like the alloy legs, but the shim definitely helps, and that's a real snug fit now. I prepare the surfaces and mix up some more epoxy and commit to the fit. First I glue the crown and shim, and then I add the leg, making sure I get a nice even coat. That all went suspiciously well. It's looking great though. Time to repeat the process for the other leg. After some curing time, I'm left with this. It's almost looking a little pro, isn't it? While the epoxy was curing, I stripped the lowers to match the crown. All I need to do now is trim them to the final length and work out where to cut the legs to get my desired fork length. I didn't go for any fancy angled cuts, but I did make them different lengths, as the right hand side can obviously be shorter due to no disc mount. I hope this won't make me ride in circles though. I did find it fairly complicated to work out where to cut the legs, but I measured thrice, so fingers crossed I don't ruin the whole thing in the next couple of clips. Looks good, but how's the length? Now that's not something I say every day. I did a test fit and it's within 2mm of my goal. Very happy with that. Now a bit like the crown, the fit on the dropouts could be tighter, so I'll shim these too. But instead of using a can, I'm going to use some aluminium foil tape. There's much less stress at the dropouts compared with the crown, so I feel the tolerances can be a little less. That said, the fit is much better now, and I have no doubt the bond will be as strong as a cat and its kitten. Once the other side was done, it was time to glue them on. This was one of the more stressful parts. When fitting the legs in the crown, I didn't really have to line anything up, but here it's vital the dropouts are both bottomed out and precisely in line. The epoxy sets in 5 mins, so I have limited time to get everything on and lined up correctly. I use a mallet to make sure they're both bottomed, and then to make sure they're lined up, I simply use my wheel to bolt the lowers together, guaranteeing they're correct. I left it overnight just to be safe, and here it is. How good does that look? Not that I'm Mr. Universe or anything, but they seem pretty solid. Overall, with all the hurdles I had to clear, I'm so happy with how it looks, almost like something you'd see in a shop. The last finishing touch is to pop a couple of plugs into the open ends. Perfect. I also decided to wrap the legs to help prevent any scratch damage. The carbon version is now finished and is looking hot. Not a bad weight at 850 grams either. You also may have noticed another fork in the background earlier. Well, I picked up another Fox 34 CSU in case the carbon one didn't work and just used the stanchions as legs. This feels pretty burly and weighs 1000 grams, which is the same as an inspired fork, so that's cool. This will be my backup in case the carbon one fails. Now, I've been neglecting the original project, haven't I? Hopefully Fork Protection Services aren't watching. Let's get this finished. I think you know the drill by now. Cut the lowers to size, mark up the legs to cut the legs, and hope for the best. Exactly the same to the millimetre. Damn, I'm good. But am I good enough to make these baggy dropouts fit? These were the original lowers, and as I mentioned before, they're pretty oversized for this diameter leg. So I'm going back to my pal, the can shim. But can it shim or share this big of a gap? Yeah, I reckon so. I repeat the process I did earlier. Once fitted and aligned, I leave it overnight again, and the next morning it's feeling solid. I wanted an all silver fork and totally forgot to strip the dropouts. Fortunately, that's still easy enough to do with them fitted, so that's what I did. With the paint removed, it's easy to see these are a lot lower quality casting than the Fox fork, but they'll do the job just fine, I'm sure. If you were wondering, yes, I did add some clear coat on any of the strip parts to help protect them. Only one thing needed now, some plugs. A perfect fit. I'm really stoked on how these turned out too. They ended up at 860 grams, which is lighter than I expected. Time will tell on how strong they are though. One last thing. Earlier I mentioned how I chose 34mm as my fork leg diameter to make them stronger and stiffer. Well, another reason is that 34mm is also the size needed to fit these retro Pacer V-brake mounts. I have a couple of retro builds planned. You may spy them in the back of a couple of shots, hence the straight steerer and QR dropouts, and I think I'd like the option of running a front V-brake. But that's all for a future video, so keep your eyes peeled. With all three forks finished, I showed them to the cute thief who really didn't seem impressed. But I've impressed myself. I ended up with triple the number of forks I originally planned, and I'm actually struggling to choose my favourite. But it's one thing if they look good, they have to work too, and ideally not instantly snap and knock my teeth out, so some testing is required. I'll try the carbon ones on my hex. These are the ones I'm most concerned about. I've actually got no idea what the carbon layup is like, and seat posts aren't really meant to be super rigid, so will they be stiff enough? I hope so, because they look cool AF. I'll need to do some hooks and taps to fully trust them, but for now I start with some endos and front hops and see how they cope. No weird noises yet, and they feel stiffer than I expected. Let's ramp this up a little. still feeling solid. How about some gaps to front? Well, first impressions are good. They didn't make any weird noises and aren't floppy noodles. More testing is required before I make any strength claims though. Now, do you have a favourite? Let me know. I'm going to start saving for a Kashima version now, or maybe a dropper post adjustable length one. But until next time, I really hope you enjoyed this project. Have an amazing week, and I'll catch you then. See you later.